They came on a Tuesday. That's what I remember most, that it was Tuesday. The sky didn't split open. There were no sirens. The news just changed. One moment we were arguing about interest rates and climate policy, the next we were told to look up. The Kolku ships hung above our major cities like judgment. Massive things. Cold geometry that hurt to look at directly. Scientists tried to explain their design, something about advanced metallurgy and energy displacement, but the truth was simpler. We looked up and saw the end of something. Maybe ourselves. I was in the lab when General Schuyler came through the door. Schuyler was military brass, the kind of man who'd spent 40 years defending a border that didn't move. Now he was being asked to negotiate humanity's surrender. "Dr. Chase," he said, and I knew it was bad. "Government men don't use your name unless they're about to ruin your life. We need your help." They wanted me because I'd written papers on adaptive molecular systems, because I understood how organisms evolved under pressure, because somewhere in the Kolku's message to our governments they'd mentioned blood, human blood specifically. The virus eating their species alive could be treated with it. A cure was theoretically possible. The Kolku were businesslike about it. No anger, no hunger for conquest, just need. 8 million humans, that was their price for not glassing the planet. The lottery started 3 weeks later. Random selection. Fair. That's what they called it. Democratic. As if rolling the dice changed the nature of what we were doing. Heather called me at home. My daughter, 23 years old, worked in systems administration for the city. She was using her supervisor voice, the one she'd learned to hide fear behind. "Dad, I'm selected," she said. The room didn't move. I didn't fall. I just stood there in my kitchen and watched the light change on the counter, as if the sun was settling into a different sky. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. The processing center was a football stadium converted into a holding area. Thousands of people. They'd separated them into sections, men, women, children, elderly, like a slaughterhouse organizing livestock. The Kolku had been clear about their needs. 8 million meant quota distribution across every nation, efficient, systematic. The governments of the world had debated for 6 days and then simply complied. Easier than war, easier than saying no and burning. Heather was in the women's section. She looked smaller than I remembered, even though it had only been 2 weeks since I'd seen her. She was trying to hold herself together, jaw tight, hands clasped in her lap. When she saw me, she broke. I held her. I told her we would fix this, that I would fix this. It was a lie, and we both knew it was a lie, but we needed the lie more than we needed the truth. A military escort came and moved me out. Families got 1 hour. That was the agreement. I drove to the labs. Blair and Alex met me in the South Corridor. They ran the resistance loosely, without formal structure, because formal structure meant records that could be traced. Blair had been a special forces operative before the surrenders. Alex was a systems administrator, Heather's former colleague, actually. They didn't know that, but they would. "The Kolku are taking them to temporary processing stations," Blair said. "Then off-world. The actual conversion happens on their vessels. What goes into the blood separator doesn't come back." I nodded. I'd seen the Kolku technical specifications. They transmitted them as part of the negotiation, a kind of proof. "Look," they seemed to say, "you know exactly what we're going to do." "I have something," I told them. "Materials from 1947, Roswell." I said it like it was still a conspiracy, but by then the governments had declassified everything. No point in secrets anymore. We'd traded transparency for humanity. "There's an alien artifact. We've had it in containment for 60 years. If I trade it along with research notes, they might negotiate Heather's release." Blair exchanged a look with Alex, not hopeful, calculating. "The Kolku don't negotiate with individuals," Alex said. "They have deals with nation-states. Then we make a bigger deal. We trade them the artifact, the research, and we poison it. We integrate something into the technical specifications that looks like an upgrade but crashes their processing. Shuts down the whole program. 8 million people walk free and the Kolku are back to dying. That's fantasy, Blair said. We don't know enough about their biology or their tech. We can't engineer something that. Then I'll learn, I said. Give me access to the artifact. Give me 48 hours. Skylar's office is facilitating the artifact transfer anyway. Defense against Kolku technology in case hostilities escalate. I'll just need to redirect. You'll need to be sober, Alex interrupted. And you're talking about sabotage, treason, they'll shoot us. They're already going to kill 8 million people, I said. What's a little treason? The resistance had a safe house in the industrial sector. Abandoned warehouse, reinforced basement, the usual careful paranoia. It took us 6 hours to get the artifact. It was smaller than I'd expected. A sphere, maybe 10 centimeters across, made of something that wasn't quite metal. It was warm. That surprised me. I don't know why. Maybe I expected aliens to be cold. Skylar called me at midnight. Where are you? He asked. Working, I said. You know I can trace that call. Yes, sir. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, thinking. What are you doing, Stephen? My job, I said, saving my daughter. That's not your job. Your job is to help us understand the Kolku so we can survive this transition. My job is to resist, I said, and hung up the phone. The artifact was impossibly complex. I'd studied molecular machinery, but this was something else. The structure was fractal, details within details. It seemed to operate on principles I couldn't identify. I worked through the night, scanning, imaging, taking samples. By dawn, I had a theory. The Kolku technology was based on harmonic resonance. Everything communicated through vibration. Information flowed like sound through a medium. If I could introduce dissonance at the right frequency, I could corrupt the processing. Not destroy it. Just make it fail. Make it spit out infected, unusable blood. We'll need raw materials, Alex said when I explained. Viral samples, genetic code. We'll need to synthesize something that mimics the Kolku's own plague but modified, something that survives the processing. The medical storage facilities have what we need, I said. Naturally occurring pathogens. We can extract and recombine. Blair looked at me hard. You're talking about creating a bioweapon. I'm talking about saving 8 million people. You're talking about gambling that we can engineer something intelligent enough to fool Kolku processing systems. You know how that ends if we're wrong. I did know. All 8 million would die. The Kolku would recognize the contamination and execute every human in their processing pipeline. And then they'd land and they'd take what they wanted the hard way. Then we don't be wrong, I said. We stole into the medical facility through the tunnels. A good resistance knows the infrastructure under a city better than the city knows itself. We had the knowledge that comes from desperation. Every old subway, every maintenance corridor, every forgotten basement. The storage was a refrigerated vault. White walls, blue lights, rows of carefully labeled containers. Heather would die anyway. This thought kept coming back to me as we worked. In the original timeline, she goes into the processing. She comes out as something else, processed, reduced to component parts for someone else's cure. The Kolku would take her apart in the name of medicine. At least this way, if we succeeded, she lived. If we failed, we all went together. It took 3 days to synthesize the modified pathogen. We had to work in the safe house basement, in a lab I'd improvised from stolen equipment. The pathogen itself was beautiful in a horrible way, a helix that would survive the Kolku's processing because it used their own harmonic technology against them. It would activate during blood synthesis, render every unit they produced toxic. On the 4th day, a team of Kolku security arrived at our door. They didn't look like the transmissions had suggested. Transmissions are sterile. These were creatures, tall and thin, with skin that seemed to shift between purple and gray depending on the light. Their hands had too many joints. Their eyes were black all the way through. They moved like something between insect and liquid, never quite solid. Dr. Stephen Chase, one of them said, and its mouth made shapes that became words. You are in violation of the settlement accord. I'm protecting my species, I said. You are violating the accord, the Kolku repeated, not angry, just stating fact. This is unacceptable. Blair moved. Her hand came up with a pistol. The Kolku moved faster. It took her arm and twisted. She screamed and then she stopped screaming because the arm came off. I'd never seen anything die before. Not really. I dissected things in school, studied corpses in medical texts, but I'd never watched someone bleed out. Blair was still moving when she hit the ground. That's the part that stays with you. Not the absence, but the lag. The delay between death and the body understanding it. Alex returned fire. The bullets passed through the Kolku like it was water. That's when I understood. They weren't aliens in the way we thought about aliens. They weren't life as we understood it. They were something that could be killed with kinetic force. We'd learn that later when we had time to mourn, but not easily. I ran. The resistance had 3 safe houses. I made it to the second one with the modified pathogen in a lead-lined case. 5 people, including me. Alex was alive somehow. She'd gotten out through a back entrance, but her left side was burned. The Kolku had touched her, and where it touched, her skin had darkened like scorched paper. They're coming, she said. They've traced us. They always trace us. We've got maybe 4 hours. Skylar called me again while we were moving. Heather's in processing, he said. They've already started the transfer. She's on one of the Kolku vessels now, Stephen. There's nothing we can do. Then I do it anyway, I said. You do what? You've already contaminated us with stolen materials and bioweapons research. You've attacked the Kolku. You've murdered one of our liaisons. The liaison was a Kolku collaborator. The liaison was a Kolku ambassador. You've started a war. I hung up. There's a moment in every resistance where you stop being yourself and start being something else. For me, that moment was standing in an abandoned subway tunnel with 4 other broken people and a biological weapon. I was a scientist. I'd never fired a gun. I'd never killed anything larger than a spider. I'd just become a terrorist. The 3rd safe house was in the Old Harbor District. Underground bunker, pre-Cold War construction. We sealed ourselves in and we worked. Alex knew how to interface with military networks. She wasn't a hacker exactly, but she knew the protocols, the frequencies, the ways data could be turned sideways. She started mapping the Kolku processing network while I worked on the delivery mechanism. The pathogen had to reach the processing core. The Kolku vessels were automated enough that a properly sequenced upload could reach critical systems. I built the code. Not elegant code, desperate code, but code that worked. We need access, I told Alex, to a transmitter, something powerful enough to reach orbit. There's a military installation 2 miles north, she said. They have the equipment. They also have soldiers. How many? More than we have bullets. We went at night, the 5 of us. Alex was barely walking. The Kolku had burned deep. You could see the black spreading under her skin like spilled ink. She was going septic from something that wasn't quite bacterial. The military installation was a command post for civilian defense. Ironic. All those soldiers tasked with defending people who'd already decided to surrender them. We didn't fight. We didn't have to. 3 of our people died breaching the perimeter. The other 2, a woman named Sarah and a man named Foster, made it to the transmitter room. I was right behind them. The transmitter was massive, a relic from when militaries still worried about Russia. It could reach space, could punch signal through the ionosphere and scatter it across the Kolku fleet. How long? I asked Sarah. To upload and execute, 4 minutes, but they'll know immediately where it came from. I nodded. 4 minutes. Alex was still alive in the corridor. She'd collapsed against a wall, her uniform soaked in sweat that had a black tint to it. When she saw me, she tried to smile. Did we? She started. Upload it, I said, right now. Sarah's fingers flew. Military protocols dissolved under the input code. The pathogen began its journey. 1, 2, 3 minutes of light-speed travel toward orbit. The soldiers came through the north entrance, 20 of them, young, confused, watching their orders collapse in real time. They didn't know who they were fighting. They only knew that their base was being attacked. Foster didn't hesitate. He came up shooting, not to kill, to create space. It worked for about 40 seconds. Then he ran out of ammunition and one of the soldiers hit him with a stun charge. He dropped. 4 minutes had passed. The upload was complete. Sarah died next. Bullet through the shoulder, another through the stomach. She kept reaching for the transmitter even as she fell, as if she could coax one more second of functionality from it. I walked out with my hands up. They didn't shoot me, which surprised me. Maybe I was still useful. Maybe Skylar had ordered them not to. Maybe they just weren't sure. They took me to a detention facility. White walls, fluorescent lights. It was exactly what I'd expected. I had no information to trade, no leverage. Skylar came to see me 12 hours later. The pathogen reached the fleet, he said. 12 vessels, 20% of their processing capacity. The Kolku are reviewing. Will it work? I asked. We don't know. If it does, you've just saved 8 million people. If it doesn't, you've triggered the largest biological threat in recorded history. The Kolku don't forgive contamination. He was looking at me like I was a problem he was trying to solve, like I was still a scientist and not a prisoner. Is my daughter alive? I asked. The vessel she was on received the pathogen upload. Processing was halted on that platform. She's suspended in containment. If the contamination is as effective as it appears, she'll remain alive in suspended state until they decide what to do with her. Hope is a cruel thing. I felt it surge in my chest like a new organ. She was alive. My daughter was alive. They're going to come for me, Skylar said. I've been facilitating negotiations between your resistance and the Kolku. That makes me a collaborator in their eyes and a traitor in yours. Either way, I'm dead. Why are you telling me this? Because you gambled everything on saving one person, and in doing so you may have saved 8 million. That's something worth knowing. He turned to leave. The Kolku are sending their own delegation. They want to meet with me, and with you if I can convince them. I was taken to a neutral zone, an old government building that had been stripped of all furniture, empty concrete and echoing silence. Skylar was already there when they brought me in. The Kolku delegation arrived in a transport that descended from orbit, 3 of them. The same shifting skin, the 2 jointed hands, but these wore what I can only describe as armor, technology woven into biological structure. When they moved, it was like watching water that had learned to want things. One of them addressed us. The contamination was sophisticated, it said, a modification of our own genetic framework. Only Dr. Chase could have conceived of it. This indicates intention rather than accident. You designed this. Yes, I said. Why? Because you were going to kill 8 million people, and I wanted to stop you. The Kolku didn't react, no expression to read, no hint of what came next. The human species operates from individual survival imperative, it said. You sacrifice the many for the genetic continuity of your personal offspring. This is inefficient but not incomprehensible. Your contamination suggests alternative thinking. It suggests I love my daughter, I said, and I love the 8 million others like her. I wanted them to live. You sacrificed 215 humans to deploy that contamination, the Kolku said. It had counted. Of course it had counted. You made a mathematics of death. Yes. This is acceptable. This is strategic. We respect this. Skylar made a small sound, a laugh or a sob, I couldn't tell. The contamination will force us to retreat, the Kolku continued. Our processing infrastructure is damaged. The organisms we attempted to develop from your blood are now toxic. We cannot proceed with the original accord. Then you'll leave, Skylar said. We will leave, the Kolku agreed. But first we wish to propose a new arrangement. The virus that kills us can be addressed through different means. We wish to establish a research initiative. Humans and Kolku, shared facilities, shared information. I understood what it was offering. Not salvation, not friendship, just a different kind of survival. My daughter, I said, the ones in suspension, will remain alive, the Kolku said. They are part of the new accord. They brought Heather to me 3 days later. She was thin, blank-eyed from the suspension protocols, but she was breathing on her own. She was alive. I held her like she might break. She held me back like she was relearning the concept. Dad, she said, and the word came out broken. I'm here, I told her. Skylar was reassigned to the joint research facility. Alex died from the contamination. The black had spread too far. They tried everything, but some wounds are too deep. The Kolku attended her funeral. That seemed to matter to her, that our enemy came to watch her be buried. The war never happened. The 8 million were released. Governments fell. New governments rose to take their place. The world spun on, carrying us all into a future none of us had chosen. I never returned to pure research. I went to the joint facility. I worked with Kolku scientists who had learned to approximate human expression. We made progress on their virus, on our cancers, on the long, slow work of stitching 2 civilizations together where we'd almost torn ourselves apart. Sometimes I think about that moment in the interrogation room when the Kolku asked me why I did it. I told them I loved my daughter. That was true. But it was simpler than that too. It was that I couldn't accept the surrender, that something in human nature rejects the mathematics of annihilation. We'd been given a price and told it was final, and I'd spent everything I had to say no. It wasn't a victory. Victories are clean. This wasn't clean. It was messy and it cost and it burned. But at least we kept our daughter. All 8 million daughters and sons and fathers and mothers. We kept them because we refused to be good subjects of a dying God. The Kolku never fully understood that. I don't think they expected us to, but they respected the cost. They remembered that we made them count every human body against the weight of their own survival, and maybe in the end, that's what forced them to see us as more than livestock. That's what I tell myself when I can't sleep, that we saved 8 million by losing hundreds, that I saved Heather by becoming the kind of man who could commit treason, that we all became something colder and harder than we were before, but we remained human. We remained ourselves. That has to be enough. It has to be. Because the alternative is accepting that we were always going to be divided up and used, and I cannot bear to believe that. Not for Heather. Not for any of us.